Okay, so my name is Liz. I work in the education and youth team, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Mayor of London to this webinar on primary science, which is the second one in a series of STEM webinars that we're hosting. And we're incredibly excited to host so many of you from all across the country, which is a rare treat for City Hall, given that we mainly cater to London, or only cater to Greater London. So yeah, welcome all of you. Great to have you here. Without further delay, I'd like to hand over to the brilliant Naomi Hiscock from Primary Science Education Consultancy, who is going to run this session for us. And I hope you find it really useful and that you enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liz. So welcome this afternoon to our science webinar, Plan Now, Assess Later. And the question mark after that is clearly an indication that actually, no, we don't plan now and assess later. The fact is we've got to think about assessment whilst we're doing our planning. Okay, so what we're going to talk about are these things this afternoon. Hopefully you'll go away with a clear understanding of what needs to be assessed and what doesn't need to be assessed. You'll have ideas of how you can build your assessment into your planning. Thinking about how to revise future plans, both generally, but also for returning back to school. Clear resources and things to support with understanding the national curriculum and some strategies that you can use for both formative and summative assessment. So firstly, we're just going to have a quick think about these three questions. The fact that you've actually turned up for a webinar that's got the words assess a science in there implies that you probably recognise that science does need to be assessed. But what I'd like us to be thinking about is who is it for, what function does it serve, and what's the impact? So firstly, I'd like you to have a quick think about this first question, who is science assessment for? So if you can just go on to the website there and put in the code, and then you should be able to type in the people that you think assessment is for. But what you can see, the way that this works is the words that people are putting in, as more people put the same word in, that word gets larger. And I think there are some key groups that are standing out there. The teachers, the children, parents, all changes every time. Then we've also got things like future teachers, senior leaders, head teachers, governors, and then also the government and Ofsted as well. So there's all sorts of different people that are interested in that science assessment. Okay, so these were the people that I were thinking about, and these are the words that were popping out very noticeably on that survey as well. So I've put the pupils there at the top, and that was coming through very strongly. Ultimately, assessment is about teachers being able to match the curriculum to the pupils. So ultimately, it should be benefiting the pupils, and the teachers are the ones that the assessment is really should be built around. What do the teachers need to know about their pupils in order to teach them better? They're future teachers, so where the children are moving up into the next year group, it's really useful and important that the teachers can look back and see where the children are that are arriving in their class. The subject leaders also, they're going to be looking for the bigger picture so that they can see where the pupils are across the school. Are there any key groups that seem to be exceeding, falling behind or doing exceptionally well? Are there year groups that or teaching classes that seem to be looking different to the rest of the profile? Senior leadership will obviously want to have a view of this as well, and then hopefully governors will be taking an interest. Parents will be given a certain amount of information about their particular pupils, and the government does get the data, particularly the end of year, well, year end of year 2 and year 6. I haven't put Ofsted on there. Ofsted will look at the end of year 2 and year 6 data. They will not look at data from assessment data for the other year groups, although that doesn't mean they won't be interested in knowing what subject leaders and teachers know about and what that assessment data, how is it working for the schools. So what's the function of assessment? It will depend on who you are. within this group. So some of these groups will actually be using that assessment data to inform their activity. So teachers will be using it to help them with their planning, both the current teacher and the future teachers. Subject leaders will be looking to see whether there's particular year groups that need additional support, whether they can give advice on how to support particular pupils that don't seem to be meeting objectives. Senior leaders will be looking at the bigger picture to check how their school is performing. Same with governors. So different people will want that assessment data for different purposes, and therefore the assessment data may look different for different people. But the most important thing is that whatever the system is, however it's being recorded, it has got to work for the teachers. It's the assessment system has got to work for them, and then hopefully the information will be used by other people. So what is the impact of assessment? Again, where impact is going to be greatest is with the use of the teachers and the future teachers and the subject leaders. That's where the assessment data is going to make the biggest impact. Other people will be reviewing it and using it strategically, but it's not going to be making that impact on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis. So we do have statutory assessment at the end of Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 against the teacher assessment framework, as I mentioned earlier. Does that mean we only need to assess and track in Year 2 and Year 6? I would suggest that the answer to that is no. This is the first statement of the teacher assessment framework for Year 6. And what you can see there is that some of the objective relies on learning that's taken place in Year 3, Year 4 and Year 5, and only one aspect of that is covered in Year 6. For any of you Year 6 teachers that are joining us today, I'm sure you will agree that there is no way that you have got time to reteach the whole of the Key Stage 2 curriculum in order to be able to assess the children to say that they're secure on this statement. Therefore, it is absolutely vital that everybody in the school, regardless of their year group, is responsible for their assessment, and they're teaching the curriculum well and assessing that curriculum well. So the Year 3 teacher, it is their job to ensure that they have done everything they can to make sure those children are secure on the skeleton system, and then the Year 6 teacher just needs to look back and go, yes, they were secure, and that's all they need to do. The Year 6 teacher, as soon as they start to reassess, will find the children have probably forgotten it all, and then we'll have to reteach it. So my advice is, if it's on the tracking sheet and it says that they're secure, and we know that the teaching in Year 3 is good and the data is robust, then they are secure. Don't go back and try and find out if they are or not. So it's everybody's role to make sure assessment is good throughout the school, which I think is nice, because actually in maths and English, it can sometimes feel a little bit like it's the Year 6's teacher's responsibility or the Year 2 teacher's responsibility to drag the children up to where we want them to be, but actually it is the responsibility of all teachers. Also, from an Ofsted point of view, it's not just about those end of key stage data, it's about that general ongoing good teaching. And the best teaching happens when there is good assessment going on in place and teachers are responding to that. Assessment has a number of different purposes, as I was saying earlier. At the bottom of this little pyramid here, we've got that ongoing teacher assessment that is happening during every single lesson. It's the teacher looking and observing and talking, marking books, all that stuff that helps them understand what is the child learning, where are they at. That information then feeds into those more summative judgments that happen at the end of a topic or at the end of the year and will be reported to parents. That then will feed into the class and school records at the end of the key stage, which is the part that the governors will be looking at and senior leaders will be looking at that more. And then in science, we do have this, biennial sample testing, which happens, it would be happening this year. That has actually, of course, been cancelled. So I would imagine, who knows, it may happen next year or it may now be skipped for another 2 years. That has no repercussions on the school. It is about how the government finds out what's the state of play in science, how is it progressing, is it getting better, hopefully. So it's made up in lots of different ways. And hopefully what you would be in agreement, and I think bearing in mind the size of that pupil word at the beginning when you were putting your ideas in, it is the bottom that is important of this pyramid. If this were a cake, if this were a wedding cake, you would need to make sure that that bottom tier was really solid. There's no point putting other tiers on top of it. It will all collapse. So it's that formative assessment, it's that teacher assessment at the bottom that is the most important part. That is what assessment is. That will then feed into all these other aspects. So it's that part we need to get right. So we're just going to talk about how assessment is used at different times during the learning sequence and how some resources can support with this. So this is a typical way that you would progress through the learning of a topic, starting with this initial finding out where children are. It's important that we do think about this and know what is it that they should already know when they get to me, so that you can remind them of what they've learned and perhaps scoop up any children who were not secure on that when they were learning it in the past. So the knowledge matrices, which I will show you where to find in just a moment, give you this prior learning. They also give you the future learning, so you know what you're not going to be covering, and also your objectives that you will need to cover. So this is the plants in year 1. They can be found on the plan website, and the link to the website is there. If you go into the teacher area and then look for the knowledge matrices, and you can download them from this particular chart. So I would have just gone into plants and downloaded it there. So there are a number of resources that can help with give you ideas and ways to find out what the children already know. I'm just going to share a few, and then I'm going to ask you to think about and put into the chat any things that you do, whether it's resources that you use or other strategies that you use to find out what children know when they start a topic. So Explorify can be a great resource. I'm sure many of you use Explorify, but if you haven't, then it is well worth having a look at. There's a range of nice, short 15-minute talk activities that are great starting points to remind children of their learning. There are also 2 other resources. The first one there, Active Assessment, is a book that's been around for a long time, so it's worth maybe digging around in the science cupboard to see if it is there. The other one is a new, much more recent book that can be purchased from TTS. Both of those are really good with ideas. If anybody's used either of those, it might be nice for you to share on the chat how you found those. And concept cartoons are another very popular way of finding out what children know. So the children are presented with different viewpoints, and then they discuss what do they agree with, who do they disagree with. So it's a nice way of not starting with a blank piece of paper. It's giving them something to base their thoughts on. So those are just a few resources. So what I'd like you to do is just to pop onto the chat things that you do or resources that you use to find out about pupils' prior learning. Okay, so thank you for that. There's lots of ideas there. Hopefully you were able to follow some of them. They were popping in extremely fast there. Just to clarify, so somebody put in about KWL grids. These are very standard. They are in the active assessment book. The K stands for what do the children already know. So it's basically a table. What do the children know? The W, what do they want to know? And the L is what have they learnt. Some people also add an H column, a how column. So that's something also that the children can think about. How would they answer these questions? We've got a range of other things like using mini quizzes. That low stake is quite a good way of doing it. Thought showers, a whole raft of ideas coming through there, which are really good. And also obviously using Explorify and things like that. I think quite often with the thought showers and that sort of thing, it's quite nice to give the children the vocabulary from the topic. So again, they can use that to stimulate their ideas about what they know, what they don't know. People also talked about giving the children resources and things to look at and explore. Kate had a question about how can pupils' attainment in science be recorded if they join they join very late to school. That is an issue, particularly in London schools with children coming and going. Obviously, if they've come from another school, you should have some data coming with them. If they've just arrived in the country, then you are in the situation where they may have been taught none of the national curriculum. These children will have to be dealt with on an individual case by case. It might be that you can do some individual assessment with those children around the prior areas of the curriculum. But as a rule of thumb, if they are secure on the knowledge state and the statements in year 6, to a certain extent, you can assume they would be secure on everything else. If they are secure on the year 6, then they should by nature be secure on everything else because the curriculum is progressive. So when you've done your elicitation activities, that should throw out, if they haven't got that prior learning, you would need to teach that first before they go on to the year 6. So again, it just needs to be planned into your planning. Okay, so in the new Ofsted framework, there is this sentence here about the planning of the curriculum and this focus on it being really important that it builds on what's been taught before, and that's what we've just been talking about, finding out what the children know, what can they remember, reminding them of that before we move on, dealing with any misconceptions, helping those students that have just arrived with us. But we need to know where these clearly defined endpoints are. And again, this is where the plan resources can support. So during this main learning part of the learning topic sequence. So before we look at the resources, just taken 4 statements from the national curriculum. These are from the materials topics in year 2, year 1 and year 5. You will notice that there are 4 statements, not 3. So one year group has 2 or maybe none, one has none. So what I'd like you to do is just think about which year groups do each of these go to. Okay, so those are the year groups. So I was a little bit sneaky and I took off the examples, which probably would have made it easier for you. If you are a teacher, possibly in year 4, you may not have had any idea of which statements these are from. If you are the subject leader, you probably would have a much better idea, but I did take the examples out, which actually makes it more tricky. So don't worry if you didn't get them in the right place, but I think that's why it's really important that people do use the resources and use the plan resources or something similar, because these statements are quite open to interpretation and we need to avoid that if we're going to get good progression through the national curriculum as the children progress. So the knowledge matrices, I have just picked out the little bits of the matrix from each of those year groups to show how the matrices support with a clearer understanding. So I'm just going to let you read that. So hopefully that does make the progression clearer. Whilst all year groups are looking at materials and their properties, year 1 is really about materials and the objects and their properties. Moving through to year 2, where we're thinking about why do particular properties make materials suitable for particular uses. This continues in year 5, but the properties that the pupils will be looking at are broader and draw on other aspects that they've learnt in different topics, such as the magnetism and electrical conductivity and that sort of thing. So you can see there's progression there. It's just really important that teachers stick to the appropriate learning for their year group. The other aspect that we need to think about is not only having that clear idea of where we need to get to, but we also need to make sure that along the way we are giving children a really secure understanding. There's sometimes a temptation to try and fit a lot in, and we can end up skipping from one concept to another because we feel there's so much to learn, so much to teach the children, and actually they don't really grasp anything really solidly. then the matrices hopefully show that there's not a lot the children need to know. So therefore we do have the time to do it thoroughly and repeat things so that children can use that knowledge in lots of different contexts. The other problem if we rush through is that we can either build in misconceptions, not because we've deliberately taught things wrong or we've taught things wrong, but because we haven't actually identified where they've drawn the wrong conclusions, and we don't deal with those misconceptions. It really is useful when dealing with misconceptions if the teacher knows what to look for. So again, on the plan resources, there is an idea of some of the common misconceptions that children may have. As a teacher, if you're bearing those in mind, you can listen out for comments like these that your children are making, and then you know that you need to build something into your planning to support the children to adjust their thinking. So we've been talking about the knowledge and the knowledge matrices in plan, but we also do need to think about the skills side of things, the working scientifically. That's the other half of our curriculum, or part of the curriculum. And again, we need to know where they need to be with that, those clearly defined endpoints. And the working scientifically matrices can also support with that. So this is just the matrix, for part of the matrix for year 1 and year 2. The statements in the green row are the national curriculum statements, and then what the plan team has done working together is just to give a little bit more clarity with the bullet points as to what do these things actually look like, what do teachers need to be teaching, what do children need to be doing, just to help teachers pitch it appropriately so we get that really good progression through the school. So these are also found on the website, where the teacher, through the teacher, and going into the working scientifically matrices. If you are the subject leader, the same information is presented in a slightly different format so that you can see the progression through the school. So that document is accessed in a different way through the subject leader tab on the website. So the last, I think it's the last part, but maybe not. Evidence of learning. What does this need to look like? There is no hard and fast way of teachers gathering evidence, and to a certain extent it will be very dependent on the age of the children, but also on the particular children within a class. So the knowledge matrices again provide some examples of what evidence might be gathered, both when for the knowledge objectives, but also when the children are applying that knowledge through various inquiry activities, what that evidence might look like. And when we've designed these and when we've been thinking about evidence for assessment, we've been very clear that it does not all have to be written down by the pupils. Teachers listening to students, pupils talking is totally acceptable form of assessment. Children drawing is also acceptable, making videos, anything. It does not have to be written down. For some children, they are able to write to show their learning. Other children will not be able to, and that doesn't mean they can't be secure in the science just because they cannot write it down. Also on the plan website are these examples of children's work. So for each area of the national curriculum for all year groups, there is a set of slides which give examples. So I've just taken 2 here from the year 5 materials. So on here you've got a brief description of the activity in the writing in black. Then the red writing shows what does this tell us about their knowledge of this particular child. The blue writing gives an indication of what this shows us about their working scientifically skills. And the green comments are things that the child has said or that the teacher has captured when they were listening to conversations. Again, just to highlight that even though this is a year 5 child, not everything is always going to be written down. The teacher is using those opportunities in class to listen to what the children are saying. So those examples can be found in the resources page, where you've got all these examples of work by year group here. The other website that is worth having a look at is the TAPS resources on the PSTT website. Again, the link will be on the slides. There are two documents that are useful, two types of documents. You have these lesson plans, which the idea is that this style of this approach can be used in all lessons, but there are a few here to get you going. So for each lesson, there is a working scientifically skill that has been selected, which this activity then is tailored to support the teacher with assessing that particular skill. And what's really helpful are those support questions that are in bullet points halfway down the slide. So I think those resources are really great when you're starting to really think about assessing working scientifically skills. And then hopefully teachers, you'll be able to build this type of approach into every single lesson. So those are found in the focused assessment plans. And then also on the website, there are some examples of children's work, which can be accessed here as well. So those might supplement the plan resources. Just so you know what's on the PSTT resources, there is an overview there and the link is there. So as far as making your judgments, summative judgments, whether this is at the end of a topic or at the end of the year or at the end of key stage, what do you actually need to do? Firstly, you need to make sure that you have covered everything in sufficient depth. If you feel you have given every statement the time that it deserves, then you should be able to assume that all children are secure. You then need to think about, okay, I have taught it well, most children are secure, but there will be perhaps a few children in your class that are not secure. So those are the children that you particularly need to be recording. You need to think about what is it that means they're not secure and what can you do within the rest of the remaining time that you've got with those children to get them to secure. Can you maybe teach something as part of a PE lesson or a music lesson? Can you just provide one more quick activity to help them get secure? What you don't need to do is assess children for working at greater depth. There are no statements against which to assess children. Teachers at year 2 and year 6 cannot assign children a greater depth level. So actually there's no need to do it. This doesn't mean you don't need to challenge and stretch your more able pupils. It does need to be built into the planning, but you don't need to assess against it. You don't need to assess them for that. So it is useful if we're going to be passing this information on to our future teachers, and that came through in that initial posting that you were doing at the beginning, we do need to record it in some way. But this is for the teacher through the year and also for the next teacher. It is not just to be gathering dust in somebody's folder or on a computer system that nobody looks at. If nobody's looking at it, then don't bother doing it, would be my advice. This is a very simple Word document and I can show you where to get it if you're interested. It literally just does have the national curriculum statements and a space underneath for you as a teacher to write which children were not secure and a quick note about why. That is all you need. By extension, everybody that's not on that page was secure. So those resources can be found on our website and the link is there. If you go into resources and click on our resources, you can download it from there. For free. Sorry, just point that out. There's a couple of questions I'm just going to have a quick look at. The question was about should we be creating statements for working at greater depth. My personal opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, and obviously if your school is requiring you to assess children at greater depth, then you will be required to do that. But my personal opinion is that teachers have a lot to do. And I would prefer that teachers are making really robust judgments about the children that are secure and not secure. And we're doing everything we can to support those pupils that are not secure to become secure. And I think working at greater depth and focusing our attention on that can actually detract from what we really need to do. So yes, we do need to challenge the children And I think that's where some of the other Explorify activities and those thinking deeper questions can be used. But I think actually it can be adding extra workload to teachers, which is not necessary. Good question. The examples of work that the plan team have put together have been done deliberately so schools do not have to do that. They're there really, they were designed to use by schools to look at that and then to judge your pupils against that. So schools would not be expected to do that for any pupils, let alone every single pupil. They're just there for schools to use for moderation. So working scientifically also needs to be assessed. Of course, there is the issue that the same statements will be being assessed by the Year 1 and the Year 2 teachers because they are common across those 2 year groups. Again, some simple document like this where we've just got those national curriculum objectives across the top and the topics down the side. This means that teachers can track when have I taught these skills, and then you could also just jot down any notes of children that are not able to perform the skills effectively. Or on my website again, there is a simple spreadsheet that can just be used. There are pages for each of the year groups. It's got the knowledge objectives and the working scientifically objectives. The idea is that if you've taught it, you should be able to put every child as secure. Their children's names would be across the top. So you would just put 2 into each of the boxes. And then you can think about, are there any children that are not secure? And you could change that 2 to a 1. And then that would remind you every time you go back to the tracking document that you need to be thinking about whether you can boost those children up. So this document you can download, but obviously feel free to use whatever is the most appropriate thing for your school. And I would always suggest use what your school uses for maths and English or something similar so that you can focus on the science assessment, not on the paperwork. The key message, though, is if this is not supporting teachers with their teaching and it is just becoming a tick list, then it is not good assessment. So always bear in mind, is it doing the job that it's designed for? Is it helping teachers to plan? Challenging more able children, I would definitely recommend Explorify, as I mentioned earlier, particularly the activities that we often don't get to, which are the ones at the bottom of the list. So the big questions are great because they are things that children will often need to do a little bit more inquiry, or they will need to do some further research. The problem solver activities come with questions that will guide the children through. I very much see those as activities that the children can be getting on with independently, whilst the teacher can be working with the children that need a little bit more work. Off the top of my head right now, I can't think of other websites that I would direct you to, but if anybody does use other websites to challenge more able pupils, please pop those onto the chat for us now. That would be great. The other thing to think about is Bloom's taxonomy and its ways that you can get the children working at the top end, that evaluation, creativity and synthesis. So activities that develop the children's broader thinking of what we're looking for. Okay, so when you're making your summative judgments, as I said earlier, you don't need to assess children at work in greater depth. I think I've already said this. There is no expectation. There's no statements to support it, and it just creates extra work. But just to reiterate, you do need to provide challenge for your more able pupils. So just because we are at this rather interesting time where children are having a different learning experience, and children at home will be getting a different learning experience even though they are in the same class. So there is going to be thinking that needs to be done when the children return, whenever that may be. So a couple of things just to think about. Firstly, the chances are that we all got a little bit caught out, not caught out, but it took us all by surprise that suddenly we're not coming to school next week. So the chances are that many of us were in the middle of teaching a unit of work. So it's really important that that doesn't get forgotten, but we can't assume that perhaps that topic of plants is all now finished. So it's really important that before we move on to anything new, we do actually think about the assessment that didn't happen, and looking at those statements and identifying what was covered sufficiently and what wasn't covered sufficiently. Then when we get a sense for when we're going to be returning, we'll need to think about what would have been covered during the period of closure, but hasn't been. It may be, depending on when we go back, that some of this can be covered during the academic year. It may be that if we go back very soon, 2 weeks if it was Easter holidays, maybe we can squeeze a little bit more at the end of the year, that actually perhaps we're not going to be, we can actually cover everything sufficiently. But I think we shouldn't rush. I think it would be better to admit, no, we haven't covered this objective, so it's going to have to go into a different year group. And then hopefully, either if you are the subject leader, but if you're not the subject leader, you'll be talking with your subject leader to identify which statements didn't get covered this year due to closure, and then finding the most appropriate place within the next year group or even the following year group where those objectives can be picked up. They will need to be picked up, but it's better to do it at the right time than try and rush it and do it too early. So we're going to finish now. That's enough of me talking. Oh, there has been a question. A couple more questions. Okay, so there was a question about the discrepancy between sample testing, the tension between sample testing and teacher assessment. I would say that they are two very different things, serving two very different purposes. So as far as I'm concerned, there is very unlikely to ever coincide, because the sample tests test children on work that they have not done since year 3 and year 4, and it is a very different situation. They are put in a room with 5 other children and an adult they don't know and expected to write everything down. That is not the way teachers have done their assessment. So I think there is always going to be a discrepancy. Okay, so I think again there was a question about how do we assess all pupils when we've got a class of 30, which is totally understandable. I would say what you need to do is your attention should be focused on those children that you're not sure about. The chances are that you have got probably 23 children in your class that you know are secure. They provide work in books, they talk to you generally, you just know they are secure. So what you need to do when you're having your discussions or when you're looking for their working scientifically skills, identify those children that you're not sure about and then focus your attention on those. But I'm going to now pass back to Liz.
Thanks, Naomi. Just wanted to say once again, thank you so much to Naomi and Bennett for a very good webinar. Thank you everyone for joining and tuning in this afternoon. Really, really great to have so many people on.